We always hear the words inflation, inflation, and inflation, but do we know what it means and what caused it to happen? How does it affect society? Does high inflation lead to economic growth or economic decline? What is the relationship between inflation and economic growth? Inflation is a regular phenomenon that may be described as a gradual increase in the overall price level of an economy. When this phenomenon occurs, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services as consumer purchasing power declines. Inflation may be measured using Consumer Price Index, which shows the average change in prices for a basket of goods obtained from comprehensive expenditure information provided by households and individuals on the goods and services purchased. The Department of Statistics Malaysia stated that the CPI Malaysia recorded at 4% in November 2022. The main contributor to inflation was the food sector, which increased by 7.3% in November. Malaysia recorded a lower inflation rate compared to other countries. The system of zakat is applied by the Muslim government to overcome inflation, as it ensures proper distribution of wealth to society in Islamic state in order to alleviate poverty and other social evils from society. This is directly related to Sustainable Development Goals number 1, no poverty, which aims to eradicate poverty in all its aspects in the economy by 2030. The poverty issue in the economy arose as the purchasing power of consumers to buy basic needs declined for the lower income groups. Therefore, inflation will affect the lower income groups in a negative way.
Actually, what was the reason behind inflation? Money supply. Inflation happens because of the increment of money supply, which will gradually increase the money growth, and at last, when the money supply increases, it will cause the inflation rate to also increase. Paco used the time series data for 13 nations and examined a study on the connection between money supply and inflation rate. According to his findings, a high money supply in a given nation is what causes a high inflation rate to occur. In the money market, increasing money supply will also raise the demand for goods and services. Therefore, the issue of inflation will emerge from more money being chased after fewer products and services. The exchange rate is also the reason why inflation happens. Cheng and Tan mentioned that the correlation between inflation and the exchange rate is unfavorable. There will be rises in the general level of prices when the exchange rate is defined as the rate of change between two national currencies. Prices are thus anticipated to decrease generally when the exchange rate declines or when domestic currency appreciates. Both manufacturing costs and the pricing of imported goods, which will fluctuate along with exchange rates, will be impacted by changes in exchange rates. Finally, the causes of inflation are the unemployment rate. The government was unable to afford to handle both of these issues simultaneously. This is due to the unfortunate fact that when trying to lower the unemployment rate, the government must also deal with the problem of excessive inflation. There are significantly more job seekers than open positions when unemployment is high. In other words, there's more labor available than there is labor needed. Inflation gives pros and cons to society. There are groups of individuals who may benefit from inflation, while others may suffer as a result of the phenomenon. Income and wealth are not distributed equitably among different groups of people, which is linked to poverty. To begin, inflation may have an impact on consumers' various levels of income. Malaysia has diverse income groups that may be categorized into three kinds of income groups in Malaysia. B40 indicates the bottom 40%, M40 indicates the middle 40%, and T20 indicates the top 20%. How does it affect the various levels of income? Firstly, the nature of these people's occupations. Lower income workers are unable to bargain for a higher wage. When the price of commodities rise due to inflation, the income of these people remains fixed regardless of the situation. Thus, the purchasing power of lower class people declined as the price rose. Individuals who earn higher incomes, on the other hand, are more likely to be employed with inflation-adjusted benefits. When there is inflation, these advantages help to offset the decline of purchasing power, and the income gaps widen during inflationary periods. Secondly, the relationship between poverty and inflation exists as money has value and its value can grow or decline over a period. Poverty is defined as a lack of financial resources. During an inflationary period, the cost of basic needs increased, demanding a greater amount of financial resources to satisfy those needs.
As a result, if the inflation rate rises over the year, the lower income groups will become poorer. Thirdly, the debtors will gain while the creditors incur a loss. Creditors will receive less money than they lend as the purchasing power of money falls. Meanwhile, debtors gain as they repay less during the inflationary period, which is lower than the money they borrowed from creditors at first. Fourthly, producers were relatively affected when the price of the product rose. During an inflationary period, customers spend their money on essentials rather than luxury items. Producers of necessities such as food, fuel, and utilities benefit from the situation since profit increases as prices go up. Consumers must spend money to obtain necessities in everyday life despite the price increases.
The relationship between inflation and economic growth. Economic growth is defined as an increase in aggregate production in an economy, which generally results in an increase in national income. The gross domestic product is used to measure economic growth. The question is whether the relationship between inflation and economic growth is linear or not, or significant or not significant. Numerous studies have investigated the relationship between inflation and growth to test and discovered its correlation. Cassidy and Mohamed and Gokul and Hanif found that economic growth and inflation were negatively correlated, and the non-linear test scores techniques is used to estimate the inflation threshold level, and the bootstrap approach is used to make inferences. Until September 2022, the Philippines, one of the Asian countries with the highest inflation rates, began to experience a decrease in growth rates, and thus the view stating that inflation does not give a positive view of growth but gives a negative effect to the economics of the country. Evidence also showed the relationship between inflation and economic growth in Asian countries such as India, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. Inflation raises prices and burdens consumers. In order for all businesses to pay the high prices of their bills, inflation causes the cost of electricity bills for Hong Kong businesses to increase, and the cost is passed on to the consumer. Business Today also reported that the electric company announced it would continuously raise electricity rates by 6.4% and 5.5%. This is demonstrated by the statement made by David Long Chi-Wai, chairman of the Seafood Delight Group, which operates 17 Chinese restaurants in housing developments and employs more than 1,000 people. He raised menu prices as a result of the increased cost of electricity. In Malaysia, the Central Bank of Malaysia mentioned that the core inflation increased further to 3.7%, while headline inflation is likely to have reached its annual peak during the quarter at 4.5%. As anticipated, sustained increase in core inflation and price volatile items, as well as the base effect from the electricity bill discount implemented in the third quarter of 2021, were the main drivers of the increase in headline inflation.
Inflation, the concept of the time value of money, and the reduction of purchasing power have existed since the early periods of Islam, although financial crises were unknown at the time. These existing crises are additional crises in the real sector, the majority of which are triggered by natural disasters. However, in the end, such a crisis frequently undermines price stability, as evidenced by an increase in the price of goods. Consequently, there are several views of Islamic law on inflation and its relationship to zakat and the indexation of cash loans. Firstly, zakat has a significant positive effect on inflation. As a Muslim, zakat is an obligatory donation in order to purify wealth. Generally, zakat is focused on redistribution of wealth to those in need. Zakat is intended to alleviate poverty, raise purchasing power, and increase mustahik production capacity. The amount of zakat collected is significantly impacted by both inflation and the increase in gold's price. By lowering the marginal propensity to consume of zakat payers, zakat can have an impact on inflation. However, when the price of gold rises due to inflation, the Muslim is obligated to pay zakat on his savings since the value of his assets has reached the amount of wealth stipulated by Sharia. Inflation causes the reduction in people's purchasing power. High inflation raises commodity prices and forces people to spend a larger portion of their income on basic necessities. Muslims who are previously able to pay zakat may no longer be able to do so, and some may even become mustahik.
Why does this happen?
The market shortages reduce people's purchasing power, leading to inflation and forcing them to prioritize basic needs over other demands, which are known as cost-push inflation. Therefore, the quantity of zakat will be negatively affected by inflation, as zakat issued by the community will fall as the amount of zakat collected by the Amil zakat agencies declines.
Secondly, indexation. The indexation of wages and rent has been acknowledged by scholars. In Islamic views, the indexation of cash loans is not allowed due to riba prohibition and explicit statements in the prophetic narrations. From Ubadah bin Samit radiallahu anhu, he said, "The Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt should be traded like for like, equal for equal, and hand in hand. If these commodities differ, you may sell as you like, as long as the exchange is hand to hand."
This shows an exchange should be between the same type of homogeneous commodity must be equal and hand-to-hand. Inequality leads to riba, and this is unrecognized in Sharia. The element of ignorance and uncertainty are also prohibited in Sharia perspective. The anticipated inflation contains a part of the uncertainty that renders a contract void, and post-fixed indexation contains an element of ignorance. In Surah Al-Baqarah verse 275 explained that the only principle of a loan is secured, and any excess over that is regarded as riba. It is understood that this prohibition applies to all transactions that might involve adjustments related to riba, including deferred currency exchange, revaluation, and devaluations. Any compensation for the decline in the value of money is not justifiable, since lending money is a financial transaction that is considered comparable to an exchange of a commodity.
The Prophet ﷺ said, "La darar wa la dirar," which means that no damage can be done or endured, while al-darar yuzal, jurists contend that damages must be made up for. According to Islamic law, the individual who inflicted the damage is required to make up for it in the case of indexation. It shows that indexation is an unfair way of identifying the principal perpetrator and redressing injustice.
Alternative way to curb inflation in the views of an Islamic economy and non-Islamic economists. Fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the use of government purchases, taxes, and transfer payments to stabilize the macro side of an economy. By adjusting its level of spending and tax revenue, the government can affect the economy by either increasing or decreasing economic activity in the short term. Fiscal policy in an Islamic economy would be utilized to achieve the same objectives as in non-Islamic economies, which are the economic stability, growth, and acceptable distribution, and some additional objectives. Firstly, the Islamic economic system should provide a fair measure of equality of opportunity to society for securing a decent livelihood. This is because Islam establishes a higher degree of economic equality and democracy through the basic principle that wealth should not be permitted to circulate amongst the wealthy only. Secondly, an Islamic economy will not be able to manipulate the rate of interest in order to achieve equilibrium in the money market, as Islam prohibits the payment of interest on any type of loan. Lastly, an Islamic economy would be committed to assist other less developed Islamic economies and spread the message and teachings of Islam as widely as possible. The absence of interest-based transactions and presence of a well-functioning zakah system are regarded as the two most distinguishing features of an Islamic economy. In non-Islamic economies, the government could implement contractionary fiscal policy to curb inflation, which is a decrease in government spending and increase in tax revenue, or a combination of the two approaches. Decline in the government spending will directly decrease transfers to individual and economic activity, as individuals receive less in transfer payments. For example, if the government decreases spending on infrastructure projects, this will directly reduce aggregate demand and gross domestic product in the economy. The state may devise discriminatory penal taxes on some investments and businesses. This will trigger GDP and economic activity to decrease. In Islamic economy, the Muslim government could spend less than its reserves, increase the rate of dues on personal incomes, and make use of the reserves accumulated in Baitul Mal. The Muslim government could spend less on transfer payments. This will cause the purchasing power of the pensioners to decline and hence lead to a higher degree of economic stability. Besides, the tax system is useful and necessary to serve the socio-economic objectives of an Islamic state. Increasing the rate of dues on personal income will cause a shift in aggregate demand towards equilibrium price level. In addition, the Muslim government could make use of the proceeds of zakat and dues which were not spent in an inflationary situation. Unlike non-Islamic economies, the system of zakat is applied. This fund could be released in order to raise individuals' purchasing power and ensure social welfare in a period of depressed economic activity.
In conclusion, inflation has a significant negative effect on not only the individual and society but also the nation's ability to sustainably grow its economy. The unfortunate person will find it difficult to purchase all necessary items like food, housing, and transportation. In addition, more people are getting into debt or taking out loans. Therefore, the government plays a vital role in reducing the impact of higher consumer prices due to inflation through fiscal policy. Although inflation is undoubtedly a bad thing, every effort should be taken to combat it through ways approved by Sharia. The system of zakat contributes significantly to economic growth and alleviates poverty in an inflationary condition. Hence, the government and zakat institutions should strive to enhance the efficiency in zakat collection, management, and distribution while also analyzing fiscal and monetary concerns pertaining to zakat funds, such as taxation and money supply.